Welcome back to Echoes of the Past, where we explore the most pivotal moments in history. Today, we take a deep dive into one of the most tense and defining periods of modern history, the Cold War. A conflict that never turned hot, but still shaped the world in ways we feel even today. So, what exactly was the Cold War? Who were the key players? And what were the major events that brought the world to the brink of nuclear disaster? Let's get started. 1. Origins of the Cold War, 1945 to 1947. The Cold War officially began after World War II when the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged with completely different ideologies. On one side, the United States promoted capitalism and democracy, while on the other, the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, pushed for communism. The tension between these ideologies started brewing as soon as Germany was defeated in 1945. The world witnessed the famous Iron Curtain speech by Winston Churchill in 1946, where he warned of Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe. Soon, President Harry Truman introduced the Truman Doctrine in 1947, officially committing the U.S. to containing communism worldwide. Additionally, the Marshall Plan was introduced, a U.S. program that provided over $12 billion to help rebuild Western European economies. The Soviets saw this as an attempt to weaken their influence, deepening the divide between the East and the West.
The Berlin Blockade and Airlift, 1948 to 1949. One of the first major crises of the Cold War was the Berlin Blockade in 1948. After World War II, Germany was divided into four zones controlled by the U, France, and the USSR. However, the city of Berlin, located deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany, was also divided. In an attempt to push the Western Allies out of West Berlin, Stalin blocked all rail, road, and canal access to the city. But instead of backing down, the West responded with the Berlin Airlift, a massive effort where American and British planes flew in supplies for nearly a year until Stalin finally lifted the blockade in 1949. This event not only deepened the divide between East and West but also led to the creation of two separate Germanys, West Germany, Federal Republic of Germany, and East Germany, German Democratic Republic. NATO and the Warsaw Pact, 1949 to 1955. In response to the growing Soviet threat, the United States and its allies established NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in 1949, a military alliance meant to counter Soviet expansion. To counter NATO, the Soviet Union formed its own military alliance in 1955, the Warsaw Pact, which included the Eastern Bloc nations. These alliances marked a clear division between Western and Eastern Europe, further cementing Cold War tensions. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953. If there was ever a time the Cold War turned into an actual battlefield, it was during the Korean War. After Japan's defeat in World War II, Korea was split along the 38th parallel, with the Soviets backing North Korea and the U.S. supporting South Korea. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, sparking a war that saw China, the USSR, and the United Nations all getting involved. The war ended in 1953 with an armistice, but the Korean peninsula remained divided, a situation that still exists today. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The Cold War had many moments of extreme tension, but perhaps none were as terrifying as the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, the Soviet Union, led by Nikita Khrushchev, secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the U.S. coast. When American spy planes discovered the missile sites, President John F. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade around Cuba and warned the USSR of possible military action. For 13 days, the world held its breath as both superpowers stood on the brink of nuclear war. Ultimately, a deal was reached. The USSR agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. secretly removing its missiles from Turkey. The Space Race, 1957 to 1969. Amid the Cold War, another battle was being fought, not on land or sea, but in space. The Soviet Union struck first with the launch of Sputnik 1 in 1957, the first artificial satellite. The U.S. responded by creating NASA and launching Project Apollo, which led to the historic moon landing in 1969, when Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon. This victory in the space race was a major morale boost for the United States. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. Another brutal conflict tied to Cold War tensions was the Vietnam War. The U.S. entered Vietnam to prevent the spread of communism, backing the South Vietnamese government against North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. This war dragged on for 2 decades, costing millions of lives. It also led to widespread protests in America, and in 1975, the U.S. withdrew, marking a significant failure in their policy of containment. The fall of the Berlin Wall and end of the Cold War, 1989 to 1991. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was weakened by economic struggles and political reforms. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, giving Eastern European nations more freedom. In 1989, the world watched in awe as the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the collapse of communist control in Eastern Europe. 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved, marking the end of the Cold War. Conclusion: the Cold War was a global chess game that shaped modern geopolitics. Though no direct war was fought between the U.S. and the USSR, proxy wars, nuclear standoffs, and ideological battles defined the era. What do you think was the most defining moment of the Cold War? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more history deep dives.